everyone. My name is Lloyd. I'm a reporter for Business Insider. Part of my coverage there includes AV and robotics. I don't know if Jonah or Harry did this on purpose, but I think they saved the best for last. I think they did. The people outside, I don't think they know that. I'm excited because we have like a mix of people representing different parts of the AV ecosystem here, let's call it. We have the ones who are directly building the platforms, Starship and indiGOtech, and we have the companies providing that sort of supportive layer, so to speak, Hub, TaskUs, Can we just go around quickly, Voltera, sorry. Can we just go around quickly and have the panelists introduce themselves, their company, and what their role is here?
So Nicholas Allen, I'm the head of AV and mobility solutions for TaskUs. We are the human-in-the-loop operational ownership behind 8 AV companies operating in the US, UK, and Japan.
I'm John McLean. I'm head of market development at Voltera. Voltera is the leading solution provider of autonomous hubs in North America. So if you've ridden in an autonomous vehicle, chances are that might have been a Voltera hub where it was charged, cleaned, serviced, maintained, and the data offloaded.
Hi, my name is Graylin, and I'm the CEO of indiGOtech. indiGOtech stands for New Mobility Tech, where we're literally building, we actually literally reinvented the wheel out of, with technologies out of MIT that has not only hub motors, but active suspension in each corner. So you'll see some of our technology outside, as well as one of the vehicles that we're building. But not only are we building our own vehicles with our own technology, we also are integrating our own power infrastructure. So we're going to be bringing swappable battery technologies for the kind of fleets that are driven by humans in autonomy. And then finally, we have a solution to have delivery tech integrated into that whole suite for a vertically integrated solution to help sustainable local transport.
Hey everyone, my name is Edward Walker. I'm the ride-sharing practice leader for Hub International and co-chair of our physical AI team. I have my other co-chair here actually sitting up front, giving me a nice props with his camera work. And if you saw us outside, we've got a sponsored serve bot with the Hub branding on that, which is always very cool to see insurance kind of in action. But excited to get into the talk today.
Hi everyone, my name is Eileen and I'm the Director of Government Affairs at Starship Technologies. We are the leading autonomous robot delivery company. I know you all have seen a lot of robots out there, but we're the best one. We started out in 2014 and since then, we have completed over 10 million deliveries, and we are in over 300 global service areas, which obviously include the US, Estonia, Finland, Germany, and the UK. So very excited to have this conversation with you all.
You see what I mean? Leaders, best for last. I want to talk about scaling autonomy and the sort of infrastructure and support layer that helps these platforms go big. I've spoken to many companies who are directly responsible for that. Some of the companies are up here. And the thing I repeatedly hear is, oh, this is an unsexy topic. That's the word they use, unsexy. And I kind of have to push back to them and be like, no, you're so sexy. You're so sexy because you're necessary. And each of you have unique insight into that experience. So I want to start with what makes autonomy work. And maybe we can answer that by touching upon like what do people or companies misunderstand or maybe sort of underestimate when we talk about making an autonomous system work in the real world. And I'll leave that to the floor.
I'll go, yeah, sure. The truth is autonomy scales on infrastructure. The way that when a fleet enters a new market, what they need is those hubs that are going to be able to service them and get them back out on the road. There's two things right behind the scaling of infrastructure. One is if you really want to get some deployment velocity, enter a new market, and have the hundreds or thousands of vehicles that you want to have, you've got to have a repeatable process. This isn't like just a few chargers in a parking lot. These are super complex sites, and our customers demand rapid throughput, dozens of activities happening at the same time on a site. And you've got to be able to do that and do it repeatedly across multiple sites in a market. The second thing is you've got to have coordination amongst the land, the power, the capital, and the permitting and everything that happens. You might be able to acquire a site in a few months. It might take you a couple of years to get power. The construction piece might be somewhere in between. Where we see delays is when you're not able to line up those components. So if you can really stick the, scaling the infrastructure development team with really talented teams, with good technology, with really deep engagement with local utilities and city officials, and you can combine those, then our customers are happy, and ultimately the riders are happy that are able to get their vehicles.
So when you hear certain ride-hailing companies say, we're going to have 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 by the next 6 years, are you like, whoa, wait, we didn't talk about that? Is it like, are they sort of being over-optimistic?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Bring it on. No, I mean, look, I think it's exciting. I think it's a great opportunity. Every time we enter a new market, it's a great chance for them to bring their product to riders in a new market, and a great chance for us at Voltera to figure out how to orchestrate all of the many pieces of cities and utilities and riders and regulators, real estate firms, really orchestrate all of that to bring a product to market.
So I can share some perspective from just looking at a lot of partners and folks that are working on autonomy as well as non-autonomy. So when you put it in perspective, Waymo is the shining star right now. And as Waymo's target by 2030 is to get to 1 billion autonomous miles. And 1 billion, to put it in reference, for all the Uber and Lyft and traditional ride, that's 40 billion per year today. And that's today, and it's continuing to grow. And then to further put it in perspective in terms of human passenger-driven miles, that's 4 trillion miles. So how do we get to really scale? We're in the beginnings of the first inning, but a lot of people obviously, sometimes they think that it's going to grow faster than it's really growing. But at the same time, they also underestimate, once it starts to take off, the acceleration on how fast it'll grow. So we very much believe at indiGO that it does take a vertically integrated approach and a holistic approach, because it's not just the technology, but also the vehicles, the charging infrastructure, the regulatory, the insurance side of things, and all of the services, cleaning, maintenance, repair, and so forth, because there is no depreciation. You're going to try to work these things to the bone. And then tying it all together in a mixed delivery environment where you can migrate and scale. So lots of work to do. This is why we decided to take a vertical approach, and our acquisition of a unmanned delivery bot company out of Estonia also gave us experience, and we're using that team to test and integrate. Our acquisition of EverCharge last year gave us really this insight into how to deploy charging, and then now ready for integrating swappable batteries into our vehicles and the charging stations. So these are all learning, and we're happy to learn over the course of time in order for us to be there when it's the right time to scale.
Just to go back, are you saying that a company has to be vertically integrated, or are you just saying think a little more vertically?
I'm saying think very vertically, and systems level thinking is the key, because if you're missing one part of the system, then the whole thing doesn't scale. If you're able to piece together all the pieces a la carte and are able to apply it in an ODD, fantastic. But if one of those pieces are missing, the whole thing starts to have unit economic issues that you deal with.
Nick, maybe you could add to that, because TaskUs plays a pretty critical role with Waymo.
So from a scaling aspect, there's so many moving parts. And that's not only from a vehicle perspective, but also an operational services perspective. Because a huge misconception, I think, is when a new market opens, the market individuals in that area are thinking, well, how do we know that these vehicles are safe? And understanding that, well, you have safety drivers that are implemented behind the wheel, monitoring how it's executing for 3 to 6 months at minimum. And then as you scale back and you have remote operations monitoring at all times. And then you're having this constant feedback loop from the individuals that are executing on a daily basis to the engineers with real-time information on what's happening in a specific market, what edge case did we encounter today, how can we adopt this, and at that point ensure that a safety framework is being put in place so that as you are moving from market to market, there is a consistent approach. And then the other thing that I think it is going to take is a global ready effort, because then localization needs to come into play as you start scaling internationally and ensuring that your regulations and compliance actions are top notch and they're very, very secure from a safety perspective, but then in adapting that to the market that you're going to as well.
So I don't think anyone in here has to be reminded that having a flashy, autonomous demo is enough. Let's talk about that. Before a fleet can move to a demo, to a real dependable service, I want to talk about some of the things that have to be in place, and I kind of want to direct that to you, Eileen, because you flexed some of the numbers from Starship. I think there's also 2,700 delivery bots, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
2,700?
We scaled up to 2,700.
And you approach it from the policy side, so what kind of regulatory hurdles do you have to clear before you deploy in a city? And also, what regulatory hurdles do you still face? I'm hoping you use San Francisco as an example, because we don't have a single delivery bot there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, something I want to point out in the difference between our operations and maybe like some of the operations for AVs is our robots operate primarily on sidewalks and crosswalks. So the regulatory frameworks are a little bit different. We face hurdles in the sense that when we enter into a market, every city still requires you to figure out what is allowed on the sidewalk and what is not. So we have to go city by city, and it's patchwork kind of reasoning behind every operations that we have. So our hope really is to be able to work with other providers to make sure that there's a scalable framework in every state. Right now, there are about 25 states out of the 50 that have some kind of personal delivery device regulation. And when we have a framework that works, what you'll see is that city adoption happens a lot faster, because when that framework exists already, you're getting the okay from the state. And cities are able to adopt much quicker in that sense. But the other thing that I want to talk about is social acceptance. So a big piece of when we move into cities is it is a little novel, right? People see them as these fun, cute robots, but what we want to do is integrate them in a way where they are seen as a helpful piece of the community, delivering food to everyone and making sure that, say, if someone was sick that day, that this food can get delivered to them. So it's a constant part of our community engagement to make sure that these robots are socially accepted, that if something goes wrong with these robots, that it's not a big PR complication.
I talked with the Starship CEO not too long ago, and it was funny because I kept pressing him on, like, how often do your robots get kicked? How often do they get stolen? And I was like, dude, you're asking me more than it actually happens. Like, he was pretty blunt about that. But, what about SF? Like, does that represent like an edge case or more extreme example of like a city that just, correct me if I'm wrong, like places a blanket ban on sidewalk robots?
It happens more in the larger cities. So like San Francisco, for example, and New York City, there's just a higher barrier to entry. And I think, an example of that is obviously what occurred recently with Waymo and their ability to operate in the New York market, a lot of the pushback comes from a lot of labor concerns, while Starship specifically knows that we integrate well into the last mile delivery system. A lot of the labor pushback is, hey, you're taking all of our jobs. But what we know is that the delivery radius that we have, which is that 1 to 2 miles that are not necessarily very profitable for traditional delivery, is the area that we want to fill. People want their food, people want their items quickly, and they want them in a cheap manner, and that's the gap that Starship is able to fill.
John kind of beat me to this question. I was curious about like that key ingredient that has to become repeatable before scale is possible. Will, your company recently deployed the second pilot launch of the GoBots in Belgium. These are autonomous grocery delivery bots. Is there a sort of a specific metric that you're going to be paying attention to that would make you determine that this pilot is a successful one?
I think ultimately it comes down to cost per package or cost per mile. And I think it has to fit the use case. The use case that we were working on with Estonia was more focused on package delivery from the depots to the locker areas. So when you can put many packages and send the vehicles out to the lockers where it gets unloaded by people that are already there, then the unit economics make sense. Fundamentally, no matter how you cut it, it comes down to the 2 E's, which is experience, economics. User experience, unit economics. If we can solve those problems, depending on the ODD, it then starts to make sense more than just an experiment. And so you got to take into consideration, of course, the hardware cost, software costs, even the telecommunications costs people don't necessarily think about, depending on where you are, whether it's, is it T-Mobile over here versus Verizon versus European, and the teleoperators that have to be there for backup, right? It's still human cost. Let's not make any mistakes that there are some that are more level 4, others that are a combination. And then how often do they break down? And what is the cost to fix them? And so, like I said, if you take a systems level approach and you look at what you're competing against, and you look at the size of the market, are you very much local and very specific target geography, or are you more general? So we're taking the approach of let's focus on building the kind of vehicles that humans are going to drive, but then very easily adaptable for autonomy. You'll see that in one of our vehicles outside. Let's make it sure that our charging infrastructure is for behind the fence or MUD that allows us to deploy on just electrification, period. But then also make it adaptable for the use cases of autonomy, because we know that there's a transition that has to take place. And then finally, on the delivery tech, we're focused on delivering the people, packages, and food at the same time. So that's why we're seeing companies like FedEx as a strategic investor of ours, Foxconn's a strategic investor, SK is a strategic investor. And we love strategic investors because it has to make sense for them as well as for us. And we know it's a journey, so we don't mind this being a long journey because we are in it for the long run.
Ed, I thought yours is an interesting case. One of the services Hub now provides is using vehicle data to prove a fleet is insurable. I mean, can you speak on what exactly fleet operators need to show?
Absolutely. I want to thank you, too, for at first calling insurance sexy, because I've been doing this for about 20 years. I think it's the first time I've heard that, so thank you very much. I think insurability at scale is really something that's overlooked maybe a little bit in this industry, and something that has a lot of different tranches that should be acknowledged. So there's a totally different insurance approach you need to take to R&D versus over-the-road deployment versus multi-state deployment versus franchising your software out and selling it to, say, OEMs or other partners And there's various different levels in between there that a lot of custom approach needs to be taken. Not to mention the regulatory environment where, depending on which state you're in, we could be adhering to various different rules, permits, rules, reporting guidelines, so on and so forth. There's a lot of nuance in between what individual operators, whether they be like a GATIC who's directly over the road delivering for their own partners and using their own technology, or other partners in the space that are developing and researching their own technology while at the same time designing it to be a product for other customers or other businesses. So a lot of this really comes down to baked in understandings of risk from a very foundational level. And I kind of want to give Will a plug here, because one of the things I see in indiGO that I really love is that they've really taken this ground up approach. So from a fundamental standpoint, we're talking about use case specific vehicles. Whether it's delivery, whether it's human passengers, we're talking about customized wheels, tires, lighter weight vehicles, very highly customized to what they're using them for. So in the insurance world, there's a lot of factors and variability in how these separate businesses get rated. Are all the technologies equal? It's hard to say. But how do we, there's a big difference between, say, a Class 8 truck that weighs 80,000 pounds or a Waymo that, weighs a little bit more than a Ford F-150. So, in a typical insurance, analysis, you talk about how heavy is the vehicle, how safe is the vehicle, what kind of damage could it do. It's really analyzing where they are in the process of developing the technology, and then what the technology is going to be used for. Because in our world, we're dealing with an interesting monumental shift. A lot of folks might just think, hey, this is auto liability, right? They're over the road, they're driving, they have passengers, this is auto liability. But the reality is we have computers driving vehicles. And the litigation environment is what we will see, and what we know will happen is it will quickly move towards product liability. So this will quickly become a software-based litigation argument versus a standard Uber, Lyft, regular old, Monday morning crash here in Los Angeles. So it's a very dynamic environment that really every use case is very specific, and we need to really drill into those details in order to best articulate both to the client as well as our carrier partners how we should best attack the risk.
You said there's a bunch of different data. Is miles driven? I feel like that's a debatable piece. Some people say it doesn't really matter at this point. Just use simulation. Do insurance, did they look at that?
Yeah, of course. I'll say this. So Waymo's recent report was 28 million miles, somewhere in that tune, and 87% reduction in fatalities or accidents, so on and so forth. What underwriters would probably tell you in the insurance community is that's not enough miles for us to understand this industry. We don't know quite yet what our loss runs are going to look like.
But how do they determine what's not enough miles? It's such a frontier technology.
It's a good question. So it's based off of a lot of historical data that we have in, let's say, traditional trucking or traditional livery. Two major verticals in the U.S. and nationally or internationally that Hub is a great expertise in. So in a lot of our work with our clients today, we are drawing on a lot of our traditional trucking and livery experience to not only kind of provide a guess as to what best kind of reporting protocols or what new regulations might come down the line, but how to really best classify and really digest the customer in question to insurance carriers to describe really what we believe their true risk profile looks like.
I do want to move on to humans in the loop. I love that conversation. I feel like the broader public still has yet to catch up on that topic. When we talk about automation, they're surprised that humans are still behind the scenes. What's the broad outlook for where the human work will go and how much that will grow, if at all? Nick, you can start, but
yeah. So in terms of growth, it's really going to be based on how the scalability of the fleets are going to be coming into play. And one of the comments that we have to work with on a regular basis is, I think it was made in the last panel that was here, was that AV is going to take jobs, but in reality, what we're doing with it is we're upskilling jobs. So we have retired truck drivers that are used to 80 to 100 hours a week sitting behind a truck and just driving all the time. Now they're sitting behind a computer. They know the rules of the road better than anyone, and being able to see how they're able to upskill their career but not have to be away from home on a long period. And when we look at that from the scalability aspect, a majority of the teams out there are still on a 1-to-1 ratio, and it's going to take a lot of data, just as was being made, how many miles is enough to be able to scale from 1-to-1 into 1-to-many. and being able to understand new market entry points are introducing new field operations teams, new emergency response groups, new depot management groups that are going to be coming out there, and the jobs are going to continue to be able to grow in those areas and then evolve and upskill individuals into a higher skilled workforce as well.
There was a specific moment I wanted to ask you about. You know, Waymo did get a grilling by the Senate committee not too long ago, and when the chief safety officer was pressed by Senator Ed Markey about where the remote operations take place, the chief safety officer said Philippines, and he said that is completely unacceptable. That's the exact quote. I mean, what do you say to that reaction, to say that having overseas remote workers is a negative?
I think the ability to have the right skill set and the right workforce doing the right roles is really what needs to be looked at. And what was explained is that it's not necessarily operations, like remote operations, it's remote intervention. And
guidance.
Yeah, and guidance, right? So the ADS is always in control, but being able to understand how they're able to evolve what we're seeing with, geofence expansion and being able to have additional labeling efforts and be able to work that through. But everything is still behind the actual software and hardware stack of the robotaxi companies in order to ensure that the ADS is always in control. So.
John, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. So just from Voltera's perspective, so at our hubs across the country, the activities are primarily human-led today. We do see a second iteration where we move to automate some of the tasks. Agreed that I think, hopefully that means the humans move to other tasks that they're doing at the hub. We're doing a couple things on our side to accelerate that, right? Like our customers now are focused primarily on deployment velocity. If you ask them what they care about, numbers 1 through 10 or how quickly can you stand a hub up or a network of hubs in a new market and how quickly can I begin doing right? So that's still our primary focus. But we know that as those hubs get stood up, over time they're going to want to make the depots more efficient. So we're doing things like exploring partnerships with a number of automation companies that want to automate some of the tasks on site, as well as for our own stack, Voltera Cloud, being able to bring in all of the data and orchestrate multiple robotic activities at the same time. I mean, once a hub is stood up, the function that it serves is really important to the unit economics of a vehicle. So being able to get things like high uptime and good turnaround time for the vehicle once it comes in makes a huge difference on the performance of a vehicle. So we don't have to be 10 steps ahead of our customer, but we do need to be 2 steps ahead of them. So we're constantly working to figure out what's the next generation of technology that our customers are going to need in their hubs.
Ed, how does the risk and compliance dynamic change when the human is taken out of the driver's seat?
Oh, it's quite dynamic, and it depends on where you want to focus. So, again, I want to make a joke about driving in Los Angeles here, but I think it's safe to say at this point, and actually to your earlier question, the insurance community has begun to come around with the actuarial data to get to better understand the risk. We are seeing, say, Swiss Re, for example, actually incorporate real-time loss history into their per mile rates at this current time. But getting back to your current question, it depends. Again, are we talking about reductions in losses, fatalities? Look, it's a dynamic marketplace. We had Munich Re just recently leave as a carrier who was arguably on 60 to 70% of a lot of autonomous customers in the space. They were running about an 8% loss ratio. It took one bad news article, arguably speaking, maybe a few other losses here and there, for them to fully pull themselves out of the space. Okay, so from an auto liability and APD perspective, we still don't really know what we're up against. So when we talk about what we do at Hub, what we really have enjoyed is we've brought new carriers into the fold this year. We've actually educated and brought more capacity, which is a big means of scalability. If we're going to really drive this thing forward, we're going to need a lot of carriers to help us do it. So from an auto liability and auto physical damage loss perspective, we don't see a lot out of the industry right now, which is a weird way to put this. Is that's almost the problem, is the actuarial tables are a little bit too good. So at a certain point, carriers have to charge for a risk that they know will eventually show up in a very nasty loss situation. It is coming at some point in time. Hopefully it's going to be mitigated the best we can. We work with our customers to make sure that they are prepared for that moment. But growing carrier capacity in this context is difficult when we don't have a lot of loss history to draw from. But on another component I want to get to is when we remove human beings from the vehicle, also within the line of the thought process of losing jobs, right? I think in this scenario, when we remove a human being from driving the vehicle, we actually drive a lot of comfortability for passengers that might not otherwise be riding in vehicles by themselves. So people who might feel a little bit safer, not having someone they don't know drive them around, whether it be children, women alone at night, so on and so forth. This might actually be an inflection point for the industry where livery services as a whole actually gain additional revenue because of comfortability within the the confines of the vehicle. Because what a lot of people don't think about when they the first thing that comes to mind is, oh wow, big Class 8 truck driven by a computer is going to plow through a bunch of cars. But what we don't think about is that the safety people will now feel inside the vehicle, separate from the over-the-road exposure, which is two of the various significant perils we like to talk through with our customers to make sure that we're diagnosing the situation.
Kind of wanted to open this question to the floor. Is there, I don't know, maybe like early discussions or any consensus among the AV industry in terms of like whether there will be a cap on how much human labor industry will actually need? Or maybe the answer might be no, we don't know yet. I'm thinking about a situation where the technology becomes so dependable and the depots get automated to a point where we no longer need to hire more. I'm not talking about like getting rid of the humans, but just no longer hiring anymore. Is there any like early thoughts about that, or?
I can say I've been in what I like to call complex casualty or like niche auto, new forms of transportation business for almost 10 years now. And I've been at the start of many, scooter sharing, micromobility, e-bikes. I've seen a lot of these industries come out with various impacts to job force. But what I've always seen is a growth in tangential business around it. Like a good example, I think, for right now would be like a company, say, like Foxglove, for example. They're coming out and helping smaller AV stacks really finish up and fine-tune the technology they're working with. I mean, that's a perfect example of something where we've created a new job ecosystem of engineers that are helping the smaller AV stacks really develop it further. So I think I have a lot of optimism, I guess you would say, about additional jobs that will be created. Will it be one-to-one? That's a hard promise to make, but in my experience with a lot of the growth that we've seen in the last 10 years in all forms of transportation, I have to believe that these small pocket new industries, tangent services, new ideas that blossom out of this autonomous revolution are going to create more jobs and really, kind of push us all forward in the right direction.
Nick, I don't want, if you want to add anything to that.
I think as you look at the technology evolving, then what is the next iteration? And then what does that also move on to? Because right now the big focus is on the robotaxi industry and how that's going to be continuing. But then you need to switch to the OEM and direct to consumer. And then how are they going to be able to either adapt or integrate the knowledge and the learnings from some of the robotaxi companies into those services? But now you have a whole new workforce that is also required to be able to assist on the direct-to-consumer side. And then what does that require from an upskilling standpoint with either the engineering piece, the technician piece, or even how is it going to be, services provided at the work site or at home instead? So,
looking toward the future, is there something specific in your respective categories that makes you guys most optimistic now that autonomous platforms are moving towards something that is more durable, useful, and scalable?
For us, what we see is, from an autonomy standpoint, designing from the vehicle all the way through. You sometimes have a chicken and the egg problem where, let's say, we automate the charging using 3-minute battery swap. Well, a charging company is not going to build swappable stations that can also charge if there are no vehicles on the road, so you got a chicken and the egg problem. No vehicle company is going to go and put the extra expensive swappable batteries into their cars unless you've got stations that are ready to support that. So this is why when we think about it from the end user perspective on how you vertically integrate and design it from scratch, that what is the best unit economics? Do you charge and leave your vehicle there and have a human plug in or even robots plug in and leave it there for 60 to 90 minutes? Taking it off the road, or do you have the ability for a 3-minute swap without any human intervention Those are things that we think about. And when you do get into an accident, can you make it very easy to bolt on and bolt off rather than use, my Tesla, if I get into a fender bender, it's thousands of dollars. But how do we design a vehicle where if I get into a fender bender, it's bolt on, bolt off, less than $200 for a fender, right? How do you think about that? And that affects insurance cost if we can design it in. And how do we have the data to be able to think about reducing that unit economics? And if we can reduce the unit economics, this is my hypothesis. When the cost per mile starts to really come down, whether it's on delivery of humans, I may not want to own a vehicle that sits there 95% of the time. And with the apps so convenient these days, we can create a whole bunch of other jobs because everybody's used to getting not just their food delivered within X number of minutes, but packages, maybe from their local mall or from their local merchants that they now have a relationship with. So we're gonna see a whole new sets of applications and sets of demand that may demand more autonomy because the cost is lower, so you even have more demand. So we're gonna be excited to see the next 3 to 5 years where that brings, but more importantly, the next 8 to 10 years where all of that transpires and how do we reduce the cost and increase the demand and change the kind of labor forces that are picking and packing and scrambling to put it into robots to be delivered.
Yeah. What about you, Eileen? Do you see something in the city halls where lawmakers feel like they're getting more comfortable with this technology, or?
Yeah, I would say that I think in the last couple of years, just the explosion in the market of, the number of PDD providers, as you saw here today already, and how we are scaling. So in the last year, we've moved from 200 sites to 270 sites. A lot of this has to do with how comfortable people are getting with our technology, the safety advancements, and that is very positive for this industry because the more people are exposed to this, the more the city governments are able to accept it. And this goes back to the social acceptance piece. Like a lot of the communities that we go to, they may not have seen autonomous technology before, and I think a lot of us take that for granted, right? We see this technology all the time, and when we go to these communities that may not have seen it before, they are excited about it, but I will say that in the last couple of years, like people have heard about this technology a lot more, and especially because of all of the autonomous vehicles that are around, that's where the associations are also being made with autonomous robots.
What about SF? I'm sorry to push you on
Back to
SF.
SF,
Is
I guess.
SF a lost cause, or, we have a new mayor, so
Yeah.
seems tech forward.
I think a few years ago, what they did was they created a framework that required handlers for the robot. And obviously, for us, we're way past the point of needing to pilot and needing a person to follow around the robot because we know the technology works. We want to go to San Francisco, but I think there has to be a good market fit for us. So what in San Francisco for us would be a great opportunity for that delivery piece. And since our focus is maybe the universities, that might be a good way to get into San Francisco. So maybe you will see it soon.
Lloyd, maybe I could just offer. So I have an analogy on the infrastructure side, right? So we don't have the same regulatory requirements as like a robot going around, but we do have things like zoning and land use, none of which I thought I would be doing in my career, right? But in the city of Los Angeles, for example, raising goats is a primary land use, but autonomous vehicle charging is not. So what that means, right, is that whenever we go into these new markets, it's a really deep engagement on the permitting and the zoning and the land use side, right? Because our business model involves going out, we buy a piece of property, right? We develop it, and we want to make sure that it's within the ODD of the autonomous providers. We want to make sure that there's power, that there's no neighbors that are going to be upset, that there's an appropriate speed limit on the, on the street in front of it. So a lot of the the regulatory piece that we're looking at is like, hey, how do we get land use and zoning, and how do we get the local permitting utility folks on board with this as a use for land, right? And there's no villains here. There's only heroes, right? But really, what it takes is from all across the industry, just engagement with folks in every right? Because this is, city by city, sometimes council district by council district, right? Just really working closely with neighbors to make sure that that we can find a zoning and a permitting pathway. And also back to what you said about social acceptability, just get people comfortable, right, with the technology and with the idea of having both the vehicles and the hub in their backyard. And I think if we can continue to advance that as an industry, then we'll be able to continue to scale.
Anything that's gotten easier maybe in the last few years that you think will sort of help supercharge scaling in the next 5 to 10 years? It's an arbitrary number, but
I'll go again at risk of talking too much. Yeah, I was just talking with one of my colleagues earlier today. When I started doing EV charging 9 years ago, the charging was the hard part, right? Like getting a charger, getting it working, getting integrated with the software consumed an enormous amount of time. Now, if I work on a project, I spend 95% of my time doing stuff that isn't the charging because it's just functioning, right? So the industry has really made this jump from charging and the sort of other service you do on AVs is the central focus, right? Like the technology or the widget to really the infrastructure being the focus, and all of the other pieces that you think about just being supporting pieces of technology which within the larger problem to be solved, which is the infrastructure.
And I don't know about becoming easier, but back on the excitement piece, the ability to have more exposure and have multiple partnerships be integrated into some of the marketplaces. So where you have Starship, Coco, and Serve being able to deliver on your last mile delivery and food applications, then you also have Lyft and Uber coming on board with multiple AV partners and getting the exposure into additional markets, but also giving you a variety of what you can be exposed to with different vehicle types, purpose-built vehicles like indiGOtech as well, and being able to see, what is possible. Therefore, the adoption can be coming into play, and then as OEMs are coming on board, you also have that ability to have direct-to-consumer be adopted quicker, and being able to have that as an option in a larger marketplace.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned optimism. What am I optimistic about insurance? Where do I want to start with this? Did anybody get their auto insurance renewal premiums recently for your own cars and get pissed off? Anybody? I imagine probably the entire room. Okay, so one of the areas of optimism I have is that auto insurance, generally speaking, and the problem is the United States in large part, okay? Talk to all 5 reinsurers that write all the auto in the United States, they will tell you the same thing, they are hemorrhaging money. The optimism I have within the scope of autonomy is insurance needs a boost. We need the help. We need to be able to fix auto insurance as a line of business. It's insurable now, but if we keep going, we cannot continue at the pace we are at. And that's why, I'm sure many of you have had Allstate or anybody that says, hey, you want to put a dongle in your car? You want to sacrifice some privacy? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? That might be a Band-Aid for now. I see autonomy and I'm very optimistic about this as a great way to collaborate within insurance to fix an otherwise very broken line of coverage at the current moment. There's other factors at play there, but a second point I wanted to make in optimism is just, not to be totally selfishly plugging Hub here, but it's just our work in the space and our ability to expand the insurance community that's dedicated to writing autonomous vehicles. It's very humbling to see such a, heavy peril. You think of the eyes of an underwriter of a computer running a 80,000 pound vehicle. It's not exactly the easiest pitch in the world. And so the optimism we're seeing from the carrier community and the intrigue, I will say, while the community isn't there yet and we're working on getting it there, we're growing it, the interest is. It's the most popular conversation in the room in these insurance circles. Does that mean everybody wants a piece of it? Not just yet, but they are waiting on the sidelines very anxiously, and that's something I very recently, just with our growth in the space, has been very promising, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that as these models grow and mature, especially with data reporting and safety requirements maybe changing in the next few months with updated regulations. But on the optimism front, I think that this is kind of a twofold question of, I think this will impact all of us, and it will also, move forward, maybe a safer means of travel, delivery, so on and so forth, less congestion, I mean, the benefits are limitless.
We'll mark 2026 Herbivore as the start of major insurance reform. Let's thank the panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You're right on time.